gardeners. So I hope all of you guys had an awesome Thanksgiving. So today's video I'm going to be covering supplementation for reptiles, and I actually filmed this a couple of days ago and I totally deleted the intro, so I'm going to refilm that part right now. So basically I'm just going to be covering the supplementation because I know it can be really confusing with reptiles. It can get very scientific and it's kind of confusing to look up. So I'm just trying to break it down and make it as easy as possible for you guys to understand and let you know what I do. I'm not an expert, I'm not a scientist. I'm sure that there are different things I can improve on, but so far this seems to be working fine for my animals. So that's why I want to share this knowledge, because you guys are always asking me these questions, and a lot of the time I see the supplementation not being done correctly. So this is my way of helping you guys out and just letting you know exactly what I do. So the very first thing that I covered the other day that got deleted was hydration. So hydration is very important for reptiles. You obviously want to make sure that they're getting the water. Not all of them drink from water bowls. If you have a veiled chameleon or a crested gecko, you need to mist down the enclosures. Just make sure that your animal is getting the hydration that it requires. And in doing so, I use Reptisafe, which is this product right here. And this product helps to dechlorinate the water. You want to make sure that any water that you are supplying to any reptile or amphibian is dechlorinated. And that's pretty much what I covered in the very first clip, and now it's going to very awkwardly transition into the next clip where I discuss UVA and UVB and supplementation. Next thing that's very important when it comes to keeping reptiles is the UVA and UVB that they will need. UVA and UVB are both provided by the sun, but when you are bringing animals into captivity, they aren't going to have that anymore, so you need to supplement with your lighting. Some animals bask all day and they will need the UVA as well as UVB, and it's very important to their health. Whereas other animals may be like a gecko or something and they are not basking out in the sunlight and they are hiding in the shade, or they're just more of a tropical animal. Those may not require the UVA or UVB. Every single reptile has its own specific needs, so you just want to make sure that you are giving them everything that they need. UVA can be found in a lot of heat bulbs that are used for animals, and this is very good for them because it obviously gives them the heat that they need. It also gives them a day-night cycle, so that way they understand when it's day, when it's night. They need that for their psychological health. All animals should still, no matter what animal you have, they should have a little bit of light every single day in order to know when it's day and when it's nighttime. The next supplement that is very, very important that a lot of people aren't very aware of or they have issues with is the UVB. UVB is very important for a lot of reptiles. Animals that do not get UVB when they need it, if there's a deficiency, it can cause metabolic bone disease and make them very sick. I will talk more about this later though. For now, I'm just going to let you know what UVB is and why it's so important. So UVB allows the synthesis of vitamin D3 in order to absorb the calcium that these animals desperately require. Something that I would like to cover with UVB, a lot of people that own reptiles, they tend to go to the pet store and get the little spiral UVBs. I would not recommend getting those, especially for a bearded dragon. A lot of people use them. The issue with them is that they don't reach down far enough into the enclosure to give the animal the proper UVB that it needs. So I use both for my bearded dragon and my veiled chameleon, a very long strip UVB. And the difference between the two is that my bearded dragon is a desert dwelling animal, so he needs a very high UVB. So I have the long strip bulb for him that is a desert, and that is very important. And then my veiled chameleon has the exact same thing, only his is a tropical rather than a desert. You need to make sure that you're keeping a very close eye on that, just to make sure that you are giving the animals enough that they need and you're not also overdoing it. If I were to give the desert bulb to my veiled chameleon when he's tropical, it would be way too much and it would potentially burn him or cause issue with his eyes, and that's just not something that you want to deal with. So just make sure you're paying attention. Don't get the spiral UVBs, get the long tube ones. And another thing with the UVB is that the light will stay on for a very long time, but UVB is not something that you can see in the air. And over time, its strength will decrease. So every 6 months, you want to replace your UVB bulbs with fresh ones, just to make sure that your animal is still getting all of that UVB that it requires. Something that can be a little complicated is the fact that not all animals need UVB. So a bearded dragon obviously needs UVB, so does a veiled chameleon. However, leopard geckos do not require this, and they are perfectly fine with just a heating mat in order to reach the temperature that they need. Something that's very important is that if you have turtles, turtles will need the heat and the UVB. It is very, very critical for their health. When it comes to snakes, snakes do not require the UVA or UVB whatsoever. They are totally fine with heat pads. So this whole video is basically going to be going over turtles, lizards, and amphibians. And that brings us all to the supplementation. If you are giving the animals the proper lighting that they need, there is still additional supplementation that is going to be needed in order to make sure that your animal is healthy. So here is where it can get very confusing for people because all animals have different needs, different requirements, and I'm going to tell you how I go over this with all of my animals. So right here I have calcium with D3, and then here is calcium without D3, and then this right here is a vitamin. So this is just a reptivitamin for all of the reptiles and amphibians. These are 3 critical things that I use for all of my animals except for the snakes. So when you have animals in captivity and you're giving them the proper lighting that they need, they still are going to need additional calcium just because they are not out in that natural sunlight, which is the most beneficial for them. And that is why all of these supplements are so important for them. However, using too many of one can also be very unhealthy for your animal and can cause health issues. So that's where it can get pretty confusing. So I am going to go through the list of the types of animals that I have and basically my system and what I do in order to make sure that they're getting the proper supplementation that they need. For my bearded dragon, he has a heat bulb and a UVB. And because he has that UVB, he is already getting D3 through that UVB. Therefore, I use most of the time calcium without D3 for him. Because if you give him too much of vitamin D3 while he's already getting it through the light, it can also potentially be very unhealthy for him, and it can actually cause him to calcify his internal organs, which is really, really horrible, and you don't want that to happen. So it also is good to make sure he's still getting a little bit of supplementation from D3, but again, you just don't want to overdo it. So my system for a bearded dragon is again the heat bulb, the UVB light, and then what I do is I usually coat his food in calcium without D3 twice a week, and then I use calcium with D3 once a month, and then once a month I use the reptivitamin and cover his food in this. Something else that is very important when you're supplementing, you never want to be dusting all of this on a food item at once. They all have to be done separately. So it's just a matter of getting a system down of which ones you should be using and when and how often. So you want to make sure that you are using calcium all the time. It just depends on if you should be using calcium with D3 or without. So now my veiled chameleon, he also has a UVB bulb and a heat. And so he has the same exact system as Dude, my bearded dragon. So I dust his food in calcium without D3 twice a week. And then I pick 1 week out of the month where I'm going to feed him the multivitamin. And then about twice a month, I give him the vitamin with D3. And again, I'm never dusting all of these at the same time. They all have to have their separate time. It's best if you want to stay organized to write this down on a calendar. So when it comes to crested and gargoyle geckos, these animals are nocturnal, so they come out at nighttime. They do not need the heat or the UVB, so it's very important to make sure that you're supplementing for these animals. So for those animals, every single time I feed them insects, which is once a week, I coat it with calcium D3. That is very important, especially if you're breeding crested geckos. You need to make sure that you're giving your females a little extra calcium as well as insects because they're going to be using that calcium in order to produce nice and healthy eggs. And then again, for crested and gargoyle geckos, once a month, I pick 1 day to just give everyone the multivitamin. And then it goes pretty much the same exact thing for amphibians. So for my frogs and for my salamander, I am sure to be giving them calcium with D3 because they do not have the heat or the UVB. And then once a month, I am giving them the reptivitamin. And then when it comes to leopard geckos or my African fat tail gecko, what I do is I give them calcium with D3 because again, they are not getting UVA or UVB. So they're getting the calcium with D3, and then once a month they're getting the multivitamin. And again, snakes are not going to be needing any of this supplementation whatsoever. They are just eating rodents or whatever you're feeding them, and they don't need the lighting requirement. But again, it's very important to make sure that you're getting this right for your turtles or lizards or amphibians. And for turtles, they do again have UVB and UVA, so they don't need the calcium D3 as much, similar to the bearded dragon. So a lot of the time I like to give them the calcium without D3, and then maybe twice a month I'll give them calcium with D3, and then again once a month I give them all a multivitamin for reptiles. So this is all very important. You want to make sure that you're getting the supplementation right, especially with the D3. You can overdo it, so you want to make sure that you have the proper lighting and the proper temperatures for these animals. I feel like the number one mistake that reptile keepers that don't do research have is the fact that they aren't giving them the proper lighting or the supplements that they need. And then without these supplements of calcium and the proper D3, these animals suffer from metabolic bone disease, which is a really nasty disease. It can cause issues with their jaw. Their bones can start growing in weird positions, like their legs will grow backwards, their spines will start shaping weird. It gets to a point where they literally can't move, and then they just die and they just suffer, and it's really, really awful. For turtles, their shells just get really soft. And what's happening with all of these deformities is that the animals are not getting the calcium that they need or the vitamin D3 in order to absorb that calcium. So what happens is their body is taking that calcium out of their bones. So their bones are essentially rotting away, which is a really horrible way for an animal to live its life, and it happens all of the time because I know that it can be complicated with all of the supplementation and lighting, but it is just so important to make sure that you're doing your best to get it right, because these animals need us. It's our choice to bring them into captivity, so we have to do it right. So if you are doing everything right, you're giving them the proper hydration, UVB, UVA, supplementation, vitamins and minerals that they need, they can really thrive and be healthy animals and live a very long life in captivity. It's just a matter of doing your research, and I understand that sometimes when you do this research, it's just a lot of looking like science, and it can be overwhelming and you're not really sure. So I'm hoping that this video can help break it down and make it a little bit easier for you guys, because I really understand the struggle. It has been difficult trying to figure out my own system with how I'm going to be supplementing all of my animals. So I really hope that this is helpful. Some other things that I just want to touch upon really quickly are gut loading. A lot of you guys have asked me about what is gut loading. So gut loading is basically when you have reptiles that eat insects, and then you make sure to feed your insects nice and healthy vegetables and just things to get more vitamins and minerals into their system before you feed it to your reptile. So I keep dubia roaches and superworms and hornworms. All of these things you can just feed healthy leafy greens is what I usually do. I usually feed whatever I have left over from my bearded dragon salad or my blue-tongued skink, and I just feed it all to like the roaches or the superworms and make sure that they have a nice healthy meal before I feed them off to my crested geckos or whatever else I may be feeding. So gut loading is just making sure that you're feeding the insects nice and healthy foods that you basically want to get into the system of your animal, so that way there's more vitamins and nutrients. Another thing that I would like to cover is bee pollen. So there isn't a lot of science done on bee pollen, but I have been using it lately for a lot of my animals, especially my bearded dragon. Bearded dragons have been known to be very picky when it comes to eating their salads. And I have noticed that if you dust on their salad a little bee pollen, they eat the entire thing. It seems to work like magic. I'm not really sure why, but it does add some more vitamins and minerals to your animal's diet. I also put it on my veiled chameleon's little salad along with insects, and same for my blue-tongued skink. You can also mix it into your blend for crested and gargoyle geckos, whether you're using Pangea or Repashy. You could just dust it right on in there too. Again, not much research has been done on it. I would not do this every single day. Maybe like once a week, maybe twice a week for a bearded dragon. It's not a big deal. But yeah, it just adds more vitamins and nutrients. You can find bee pollen at your local stores. If you can't find it, I actually sell it in my Etsy, so you guys can check that out. I will put the link in the description in case you would like to try that for your bearded dragons, because I know a lot of people have a really hard time getting them to eat salads. And that pretty much covers everything. I hope that I went over that well. I hope that that's kind of easier for you guys to understand. Supplementation is a really, really important thing when it comes to keeping reptiles, and we just have to try our best to get it right. Leave a comment, let me know what you think. Thank you so much for watching, and have a wonderful day.